Tom Hanks turned away from Jimmy Fallon mid-sentence. Not gradually. Not with any warning. He simply stopped speaking, turned his body toward the back of the stage, and went still. His hands, which had been moving easily in front of him the way they always do when he is telling a story, dropped into his lap. Jimmy Fallon's mouth stayed open. The question he had just asked, a light question, a nothing question about a film, hung in the air without an answer. The band did not play. The audience did not breathe. Jimmy Fallon looked at Tom Hanks, and then he looked at his producer standing in the wing, and neither of them moved. It was a Wednesday night taping. October 2022. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Tom Hanks was the guest, promoting a film. Routine celebrity interview. The kind of booking that fills a slot gracefully. He walked out the way Tom Hanks always walks out, unhurried, already smiling before he reached the desk, already looking at the audience the way a man looks at people he is genuinely glad to be in the same room with. He sat down. He crossed one leg over the other. He looked, as he always looks, like he arrived early and has been enjoying himself ever since. The interview was moving well. Tom Hanks is a professional of the highest order, the kind of guest who makes a host look better than they are. He told a story about filming in a remote location that made 300 people lean forward at once. He laughed at himself. He was warm and generous with every answer. Everything was easy. Everything was working. Then Jimmy said a name. It was not a rehearsed moment. The name was not on any card. Jimmy Fallon had heard it from a producer 20 minutes before the taping, passed along in a note that arrived from a man who had driven 4 hours from western Pennsylvania to be in the audience that night. The producer had thought it might make a nice segment closer, a small human interest beat to end the interview on warmth. Jimmy said the name the way you say a name when you are not entirely sure of its significance. Does the name Roy Pilcher mean anything to you? Not dramatic, not a setup, just a name. Tom Hanks heard it, and his body changed before his mind could decide anything about it. His head turned to the left, slowly, not looking at anyone, looking at something that was not in the room. His right hand, which had been resting on the armrest, lifted slightly and then settled again. His jaw held closed. His eyes, and Jimmy Fallon saw this clearly, went wet before a single word was spoken. The entire studio froze. The audience had been laughing 30 seconds earlier. Now no one moved. 300 people watched Tom Hanks sit very still in a chair and do nothing, and somehow the doing of nothing held every person in that room in place. Jimmy Fallon set down his card. He did not ask a follow-up question. He did not lean into the moment the way a host sometimes does when he senses an opportunity. He simply waited, the way you wait when you understand that whatever is happening belongs to the other person and not to you. Tom Hanks exhaled once. Long, careful. And then he said, barely above a whisper, caught perfectly by his microphone, "Roy Pilcher is still alive?" 300 people held their breath. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1988. Tom Hanks wasn't always Tom Hanks, beloved actor, 2-time Academy Award winner, and one of the most trusted human beings in America. In the spring of 1988, he was 31 years old and newly famous in a way that had not yet settled into anything comfortable. Big had just been released. The world had decided something about him almost overnight, that he was safe, that he was good, that he was the kind of person you could trust with your feelings, and he was still figuring out how to carry that. He was in Pittsburgh for a press day. One afternoon between interviews, he slipped out of the hotel alone. He needed an hour without a car and a handler and someone asking him questions. walked into a diner near the river, the kind of place that has been in the same location since 1952 and has not needed to change anything about itself in the intervening years. Formica countertop. Coffee that comes without you asking. A pie case with exactly 3 options. He sat at the counter. The man next to him was 61 years old, though Tom Hanks did not know that then. He was large and quiet, with the particular stillness of someone who has been working with his hands his entire life. He was wearing a canvas jacket with a postal service patch on the left arm, faded enough to suggest he had been wearing it for a long time. He was eating a piece of apple pie and reading a newspaper and not looking at anyone. His name was Roy Pilcher. He had been a mail carrier in the same neighborhood of Pittsburgh for 33 years. He had a wife named Gloria, a son named David, and a house on a street he had lived on since 1971. He was, by every external measure, a man whose life had proceeded exactly as he had hoped it would. What Tom Hanks did not know, what no one in that diner knew, was that Roy Pilcher had walked in that afternoon carrying something he had not told his wife about. 3 weeks earlier, his doctor had found something on a scan. The preliminary results were not good. Roy had not yet told Gloria. He had not yet told David. He had come to the diner alone because he needed somewhere to sit with it before he decided what to do next. Tom Hanks ordered coffee. Roy Pilcher continued reading his newspaper. Then Tom Hanks knocked his coffee cup with his elbow, and it went across the counter, and Roy Pilcher caught it. A reflex. The kind of thing that happens before the brain registers what the hands have done. They looked at each other. Tom Hanks started to apologize, and Roy Pilcher waved it off, and they started talking the way people sometimes talk in diners when neither of them has anywhere particular to be. Tom Hanks did not tell Roy Pilcher who he was. Roy Pilcher did not tell Tom Hanks what his doctor had said 3 weeks earlier. They talked about Pittsburgh. They talked about the river. Roy Pilcher talked about the neighborhoods he had walked for 33 years, all the doors he had knocked on, all the letters he had delivered, all the quiet things that happen on a street that the people living on it never think to mention to each other. He said, "I have delivered letters that changed people's lives, birth announcements, college acceptances, love letters and letters that ended love. I have held all of those things in my hands before the person they were meant for ever knew they were coming. It is the strangest kind of privilege." Tom Hanks sat with that for a moment. He said, "I think I understand what you mean. I get to be the person who carries something into a room before the audience knows what it is. You and I might be in the same business." Roy Pilcher looked at him, and then he smiled. A real one, unhurried, the kind that arrives without being arranged. He said, "I thought I recognized you." They laughed. They finished their coffee. Before Tom Hanks left, he wrote his address on a paper napkin. His actual address, the one where letters would reach him, not a management company. He told Roy Pilcher to write to him if he ever wanted to continue the conversation. He had not expected anyone to actually write. Roy Pilcher wrote 6 months later. A single page. He told Tom Hanks that he had gone back to his doctor, that the second scan had come back clean, that he had told Gloria and David what had happened, and that telling them had been the hardest and most important thing he had ever done. He said he had thought about what Tom Hanks said in the diner many times since, about carrying something into a room before the person knows what it is. He said, "You carried something into that diner that afternoon without knowing it. I needed someone to talk to, and you sat down next to me, and I think that matters more than you know." He signed it, Roy Pilcher, Pittsburgh, PA, 33 years, same route. Tom Hanks wrote back, They exchanged letters for 2 years, 8 letters in total, 4 from each of them. Then, Roy Pilcher retired in 1991. He and Gloria moved to a smaller house in western Pennsylvania, a town called Kittanning, where their son David had settled with his family. The forwarding address Tom Hanks had for him stopped delivering. The last letter he sent came back unopened. He kept it. He kept every letter Roy Pilcher had ever sent him in a folder in a desk drawer that he had moved from house to house over 30 years. He had never stopped wondering. In the particular quiet way, you wonder about someone who meant something specific at a specific time. Whether Roy Pilcher was still alive. David Pilcher had found the 8 letters after his father's death. Roy Pilcher had died in February 2022 at the age of 94 in the same house in Kittanning where he had lived for 30 years. Beside the letters, David found a clipping from a newspaper, a profile of Tom Hanks from 1994. His father had circled one line with a ballpoint pen. The line read, "There are people you meet for an afternoon who stay with you for the rest of your life. I have been lucky enough to meet a few of those people." David Pilcher drove 4 hours to New York. He had brought the letters with him. And one more thing. Behind the scenes, David Pilcher had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He had arrived at the studio 3 hours early with a manila envelope and a request that was so specific and so quietly stated that the producer who received it had gone directly to the showrunner. "He needs to hear the name before he sees anything else," David had told her. "That's how my father would have wanted it." Now the audience understood what they were watching. Tom Hanks was not performing. He was not lost in a thought. He had heard a name that he had last spoken aloud 30 years ago, suddenly placed into a live television studio on a Wednesday night in October, and his body had done what bodies do when the past arrives, without warning. It turned away, reflexively, the way you turn toward a sound in a dark room. Not in fear, in recognition. He turned back now. He looked at Jimmy Fallon. His eyes were red. He was not trying to compose himself. He was not waiting for a commercial break. He was a man sitting in a chair in a television studio, fully undone, and making no effort to pretend otherwise. "Where is he?" Tom Hanks said. "Is he here?" Jimmy Fallon could only point, but this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. David Pilcher stood up from the 3rd row. He was 63 years old, broad-shouldered, like his father. A canvas jacket, not unlike the one in the story his father had told him 100 times. He was holding a manila envelope in both hands. Tom Hanks stood up from the chair. Jimmy Fallon took one step back. David Pilcher walked to the edge of the stage. Tom Hanks came down the steps to meet him. They stood together at the base of the stage, not on it, not in the audience, in the space between. "He talked about you," David Pilcher said. His voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has been preparing for a long time. "He talked about you for 30 years. Tom Hanks put his hand over his mouth. He left it there for a moment. "How old was he?" he said finally. His voice was low, careful, 94. February, Tom Hanks nodded. He nodded the way you nod when a number you have been afraid to imagine turns out to be a good one. "He had a good life," David said. "Long life. All of us around him. He was a good man," Tom Hanks said. "I knew that from one afternoon." David Pilcher opened the manila envelope. He removed 8 letters, folded, soft at the creases, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, the kind of letters that have been handled many times over many years by someone who was not willing to let them go too far from reach. He held them out. "He kept everything you sent him," David said. "He wanted you to have them back." he said. David stopped for a moment. He said, "He carried something into that diner for me. I want to return it." Tom Hanks took the letters with both hands. He held them the way you hold something you did not expect to ever hold again, carefully, with a kind of attention that has nothing performative in it. Jimmy Fallon turned to face the audience. He did not have words. He spread his hands wide, a gesture that meant, "I have nothing. You are on your own with this one." 300 people were already on their feet. Questlove set his drumsticks down on the kit and stood. The director in the control room did not cut to commercial. The camera operator closest to the stage was crying. Tom Hanks and David Pilcher stood at the foot of the Tonight Show stage, and Tom Hanks said one more thing, quietly. Not for the cameras, not for the audience, but caught perfectly by his microphone. "Tell me about him. Tell me everything." Tom Hanks and David Pilcher talked for 40 minutes after the cameras stopped. The Tonight Show did not air that evening at its scheduled time. The network held the broadcast 2 hours while the production team made a decision about what they had. They aired it intact. No edits. The 8 letters Roy Pilcher wrote to Tom Hanks between 1988 and 1991 are now held in the collection of the Senator John Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, donated by Tom Hanks and the Pilcher family jointly in the spring of 2023. Roy Pilcher's postal route, 33 years, same streets, same doors, is marked on the wall beside them with a simple label. At the bottom of the display case, in small type, is a line from Roy Pilcher's final letter to Tom Hanks, written in 1991. "You carried something into that diner before I knew I needed it. Some deliveries take 30 years to arrive.